The Council of Nicaea accomplished 3 goals, all of which are still in effect today. The decree served to standardize the planetary week of 7 days, making Dies Solis the first day of the week and Dies Saturni, Saturn's day, the last day of the week. It also guaranteed that Passover and Easter would never fall on the same day. Finally, it exalted Dies Solis as the day of worship for both pagans and Christians. The long-term effect of this was that Easter Sunday entered the modern Christian paradigm as the true day of Christ's resurrection. The corollary to this realignment of time calculation is that the day preceding Easter Sunday, Saturday, became forever after the true biblical seventh-day Sabbath. This is the true significance of Constantine's Sunday law. The foundation was thus laid for the modern assumption that a continuously weekly cycle has always existed. The fallout from this edict was immediate. The law made it illegal to use the biblical calendar, and it persecuted those who still tried to use it. It was no more possible under Constans to apply the old calendar. In subsequent years, the Jews went through iron and fire. The Christian, papal Roman emperors forbade the Jewish computation of the calendar and did not allow the announcement of the feast days. Gratz says, the Jewish and apostolic Christian communities were left in utter doubt concerning the most important religious decisions as pertaining to their festivals. The immediate consequence was the fixation and calculation of the Hebrew calendar by Hillel II. The Jews are very open about this change of calendar. Often, when you try and present the biblical calendar to them, they will say, well, the Jews have never lost the Sabbath. The Jews worship on Saturday, so Saturday has to be the Bible Sabbath because the Jews have never lost the Sabbath. That's true. They have never lost the Sabbath. But by their own admission, they have changed the calendar by which you find the Sabbath. Do your own research on this. I'd like to share with you a few writings from the Jews themselves that admit that the calendar they now use was changed in the 4th century after the Council of Nicaea, and that their modern calendar is not the biblical calendar. Under the reign of Constantius, the persecutions of the Jews reached such a height that the computation of the calendar was forbidden under pain of severe punishment. Declaring the new month by observation of the new moon, and the new year by the arrival of spring, can only be done by the Sanhedrin. In the time of Hillel II, the last president of the Sanhedrin, the Romans prohibited this practice. Hillel II was therefore forced to institute his fixed calendar, thus in effect giving the Sanhedrin's advance approval to the calendar of all future years. Maimonides and most other Jewish chronologers agree that the modern Jewish calendar is based upon the mean motions of the sun and moon, the true calendar having been set aside. Here's a picture of a page 410 from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. In the right-hand column under Sabbath and New Moon is a very clear statement. The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was dependent upon the lunar cycle. Originally, the new moon was celebrated in the same way as the Sabbath. Gradually, it became less important, while the Sabbath became more and more a day of religion and humanity. The true calendar, as we have said, was very user-friendly. The dates of each month line up with the same days of the week for every month and every year. When Hillel II was forced to fix the calendar and tied it to the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, rather than the barley harvest, Sometimes the new moon would fall on a Julian date that would throw off the feasts. And so it was at that time that into Jewish calendation entered rules of postponement. And in the original calendar, rules of postponement weren't needed because God's calendar was perfect. It worked precisely, and you never had an annual feast landing on a seventh-day Sabbath that wasn't meant to be that way. The rules of postponement came in after Hillel II fixed the calendar. This controversy over calendars was not resolved in Constantine's time and by his edict. Instead, it opened the floodgates for persecution of Christians by Christians. Those who were convicted by conscience to observe Passover and Sabbath by the biblical calendar were unwilling to accept civil legislation in the realm of religion, and these continued to worship by the lunisolar calendar in the face of intense persecution. Christians who were blessed enough to live on the fringes of the Roman Empire continued to use biblical calendation for centuries after Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea is the culmination of many years of compromise with paganism. In the previous lecture, we discussed the process of amalgamation of Christianity with paganism. This was climaxed at the Council of Nicaea with legislation that outlawed the only calendar by which the true biblical Sabbath and the true date of Christ's resurrection can be found. The spirit of concession to paganism opened the way for a still further disregard of heaven's authority. Satan, working through unconsecrated leaders of the church, tampered with the fourth commandment also and essayed to set aside the ancient Sabbath, the day which God had blessed and sanctified, and in its stead to exalt the festival observed by the heathen as the venerable day of the sun. Counterfeit worship requires a counterfeit calendar, and the Council of Nicaea provided it. Biblical calendation was supplanted by pagan solar calendation. The planetary week replaced the biblical week, which depended upon observation of the new moon. This planetary week was paganism's counterfeit of the true biblical week instituted by the Creator in the beginning of Earth's history. In the counterfeit week employed in ancient paganism, the venerable day of the sun was esteemed by the heathen above the other 6 days because it was regarded as sacred to the sun, the chief of the planetary deities. Just as the true Sabbath is inseparably linked with the biblical week, so the false Sabbath of pagan origin needed a weekly cycle. Thus we have found that the two counterfeit institutions were linked together. In 321 AD, Constantine, Emperor of Rome, by civil enactments, made the venerable day of the sun, which day was then notable for its veneration, the weekly rest day of the empire. The enforcement of the weekly observance of Sunday gave official recognition to the week of 7 days and resulted in the introduction of it into the official civil calendar of Rome. The Romans passed that calendar down to us, and in it we have still the ancient planetary titles of the days of the week. The modern 7-day week was not borrowed from the Hebrews. It is traced back to pagan roots. The aftershocks of the Council of Nicaea are still felt worldwide. Of this one attack, of any attack, either indirect or direct against the Sabbath, this one act has had the most profound, far-reaching effects. The entire world is now united using this calendar in its modern Gregorian form. Entire churches base their religious observance off of this pagan calendar. The foundation laid by Constantine's Sunday law is the reason for worship on Sunday and Saturday to this day. The decrees of Nicaea legislated into place in the entire counterfeit system of religion with a pagan solar calendar. Thus, the knowledge of the Creator's true calendar was buried under the accumulated weight of centuries of continuously cycling weeks. When the historical facts of the Julian calendar are understood, it becomes very clear that Sunday is not the only counterfeit day of worship. Saturday, Dies Saturni, the original first day of the pagan week, is also a counterfeit. It is also a worship day, just like Sunday, founded upon paganism. As the seventh day of the modern week, it is a counterfeit of the true seventh-day Sabbath. The ancient proverb that states, "He who controls the calendar controls the world," is still true to this day. When Satan said that he would sit on the mount of the congregation,